Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Veterans Day 2021, and we have a stellar program for you. It's all about story. Dakar for the Performing Arts and the Pan-Africanists present Homage to Warriors, past and present. There are a variety of clubs of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Buffalo Soldiers here to meet one of our guests, meet Mr. Anthony Powell, historian. Also, General Arnold Bray is here, retired Brigadier General Arnold Bray, on the importance of the movement west, all about stories, all about African American warriors. So without further ado, let me talk a little bit to General Bray. You are a retired Brigadier General from the Army, as I understand.
Indeed I am. I am. As a matter of fact, I take great pride in saying that because, you know, George Washington once said that you can't have a nation without an army. And so I got a chance to join our nation's first service. And but like most of the folks that's here, I came for the discourse that I could have with somebody. I spent my career looking at units and organizations and fighting soldiers. But I've learned so much from Mr. Anthony Powell about the people whose shoulders I stand on. And so while I know history and I know units and I know some individuals, he spent his life looking at each person that has served, and he's able to change some of the narratives that I know about individuals. So I'm gonna go ahead, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna take this ball and pass it to him for a second, and then we'll talk a little more.
Okay, thank you very much, General Bray. Thank you very much. You know, the history of the African American soldier is a history that is sometimes can be involved in mythology. My job for 50 years has been to turn that mythology into reality, into real history. I'm going to give you an example. When I was 13, I thought I knew everything in the world. And I asked my grandfather one day, who I was living with, my grandparents here in LA. I said, "Granddad, why did you join this racist country's army?" And my grandfather told me something that I'd never forget. He said the Army gave him the only part of the American dream that the nation would let him share in. Now, my first response was, "Granddad's an Uncle Tom. What's going on?" It took me a couple of years to really appreciate what he had told me. Here was a 13-year-old from Tennessee who talks his way into the American Army. For 40 years, he served in that army. And you have to remember, he was totally illiterate, but the Army stepped in. It taught him how to read and write. It taught him how to be a soldier and a wonderful citizen. So my grandfather's experiences were something that made me want to talk to other men over the course of my 50 years of seeing why you joined the Army. And each person told me something that was always unique. That something was that they were Americans. And you may say, "Well, we live in this country." Yeah, I guess they are. But they say, no, it's more than that. We bled for this country. We served this country. We helped build this country. I interviewed an old man in Phoenix, Arizona. And the guy told me, he says, "Young man, I joined the Army because I liked the uniform." And I'm saying, "Oh my God, you like the uniform?" He says, "Yeah." And I said, "Why?" Because he said it made me feel like somebody. When you look at pictures and you see individuals of African descent who served in the military 200 years ago, 100 years ago, in the present, you see these men. And so my quest has been to examine who these soldiers were. Take the myth out of who they were. Because at the end of the day, these men were Americans. And I used to say, like I said to my grandfather, "You served this country, look how they treated us." But they said, "We built this country. This is our country." There were times I'd be walking and People say, go back to Africa. And what I would tell them is 400 years ago, people brought my ancestors here not by choice, okay? This is my place, my home, my country. And I think as I talked to these men over the ensuing years in their families, I learned one important thing. That was the love of liberty. I'll give you another good example because I talk too much sometimes.
And we only have a minute.
A minute left. I remember when we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. And the Pledge of Allegiance was, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic to which it stands, one nation indivisible, undivided, for liberty and justice for all.
Wow. On that note, thank you. Thank you so much. We'd like to bring out now Tuskegee Airman Jerry Hodges. I'm sure his story is one that we both want to hear and know a little bit more about, and I'd like to contrast that with your history. But first, let's hear from Tuskegee Airman Jerry Hodges.
Mr. Hodges, can you hear us? No.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Jerry, are you on? Can you hear us?
Hello? Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Hodges, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. Oh, man.
Well, first of all, the fact that you're able to talk to us and not being viewed says an incredible amount. If you could, one of the things you've earned is a rank and a title. What was your rank, your final rank in the military?
I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, September 1945, in the class 45F twin engine at Tuskegee Airfield at the time. There were about 16 graduates in my twin engine class. The remaining ones were single engine pilots. The total in my class that graduated was 39, which was the largest class that had ever graduated at Tuskegee.
You were training on the new airplanes at that point, right?
We started the training over at Moulton Field, which was a part of Tuskegee Institute at that time, and there we flew the Joe Stearman, which was a bi-wing training plane. It's probably one of the safest planes ever built. When we moved back to the base to get basic and advanced training, in the basic training we flew the AT-6, which they had just started really using as a basic training. It has always been an advanced training aircraft. We moved on to advanced training, and we had a stripped down B-25 twin-engine bomber.
This is the Veterans Day 2021. We are proud to have you online to talk to you. Were you aware that you were part of the vanguard? Were you aware of your place in African American history?
No, I was not aware of that. My primary focus and most of the other cadets at that time, they were really just trying to become really great pilots, and they were not concerned about history or their effect on the United States attitude toward us.
We want to first of all just kind of thank you for what you've done. Thank you for also inspiring us in two ways. One is that you had the benefit of learning from the first generation of black pilots. That's powerful. And then the fact that you were willing to move forward and just do your best. And therefore, rather than being someone they call a token pilot, you became a wedge for others in history. I personally thank you, and the three veterans here on stage, thank you for what you've done. And we thank you for continuing to inspire us by both your presence, your mental acuity, and keeping us connected to our past. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate you. And we'll send our well wishes back with your compatriots from your team. So again, thank you, sir.
Wow, that was Lieutenant Jerry Hodges, Tuskegee Airman. That was an absolute pleasure. The importance of story. Frank Martin, documentarian, was awarded the NAACP Image Award for his work, is with us. And we'd like to hear from Frank, and then we'd like to see his film. Frank?
Greetings from Honduras, and which is where I live right now.
Oh, yes.
And had I known General Bray was going to be present, I would have dressed a little better. The film, For Love of Liberty, the story of America's Black Patriots, took 10 years to make. We began it back in 2000, long before 9/11. I finished writing the treatment, as a matter of fact, on September 10th. Went to bed, woke up, the world changed, and I thought, wow, well, this story is going to be more relevant now than ever before. Well, it turned out that it was an uphill climb the whole way. This documentary spanned the revolution until the present day. And, you know, at that point, Barack Obama had not yet been elected president. So the film is an attempt to capture the multi-spectrum service of the Black America in defense of this country. And the documentary asks and answers a question that I think is fundamental to the whole discussion. And that is, why should anyone shed their blood in defense of a nation that treated them like second-class citizens? And the answer to that question is that they did it for the love of liberty. And that question is asked and answered time and time again throughout the 4 hours of the documentary. So I would encourage you all to give it a watch. You know, you can find it in, you know, various places throughout the internet. And I know that these guys are going to run some clips in the body of this program. So you'll get to see a little bit of it. But the film is a powerful testament to the pursuit of liberty and freedom. And I was greatly honored to have made it. You know, I can't take credit for the idea, but it took a village to get it made. And, at the end of the day, it's probably the thing I'm the most proudest of in my career. So again, my thanks for having me here. I hope you get a chance to look at the film, and I know you'll enjoy it. So I'm going to sign off now from Honduras and toss it back over to General Bray and Mr. Powell.
I have stood in battle, where balls like hail were flying all around me. The man standing next to me was shot by my side. His blood spotted upon my clothes, which I wore for weeks. My nearest blood, except that which runs in my vein, was shed for liberty. Liberty is dear to my heart. I cannot endure the thought that my countrymen should be slaves. Revolutionary War veteran Samuel Harris.
Hello, I'm Colin Powell, and I was an American soldier for 35 years. I was a black American soldier, and I followed in a long tradition of black men and women who have served this nation since long before our Revolutionary War. For so many years, they served their nation without their nation ever serving them. They served because they believed in this nation. They believed in the promise of our democracy. They believed in what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution said. But for so many years, they were denied the rights and the privileges that other Americans enjoyed. Their story isn't well known. Their story was suppressed. Historians did not write about it well enough. But there's a wonderful story. It is a story of a group of Americans who never lost their love of this country, never lost their faith in what the Founding Fathers had promised. And that's why this story is simply called for love of liberty.
To the war has gone. In the ranks of death. In the ranks of death. You find him. His father's soul. His father's soul has girded on. And his wild heart's son. And his wild
The record of this nation's African-American servicemen and women is a heroic story draped in irony. Why, despite enormous injustice, did these determined individuals fight so valiantly for freedoms they themselves did not enjoy? The answer to this question can be found in the letters, diaries, thoughts, and reflections of those who were there. Their words are relevant to every American and speak of courage, honor, duty, and sacrifice for love of liberty. I'm Halle Berry, and this is their story.
When Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death," Negroes accounted for nearly 20% of America's population. Most were slaves.
I was born on the eastern shore of Maryland in the year of our Lord, 1753, in a state of slavery, and belonged to Francis de Shields. He was a colonel in Washington's army. I was with him through the whole course of the Revolutionary War. There, human blood ran down in torrents till the waters of the river were red as crimson. Revolutionary War veteran James Roberts.
In the spring of 1775, England sent a detachment of 700 men to Concord, Massachusetts, to destroy the colony's military supplies. Paul Revere passed the word that British regulars were coming and Minutemen, both black and white, were waiting for them at Lexington. Prince Estabrook was among those patriots who were wounded. He was a slave.
At Lexington they did appear, arrayed in hostile form. And though our friends were peaceful there, yet on them fell the storm. Thrice happy they who thus resign into the peaceful grave, much better there, in death confined, than a surviving slave. Poet, soldier, preacher, Lemuel Haynes.
"4 months later, General Andrew Jackson's army was facing defeat in Louisiana. The British were about to attack New Orleans, and the Americans were ill-prepared to stop them. Desperate times called for desperate measures.
I call on free men of color to rally round the standard of the eagle, to defend all which is dear in existence. As sons of freedom, you are now called upon to defend our most inestimable blessing. General Andrew Jackson."
General Jackson also appealed to plantation owners for help. The wealthy land barons offered their slaves instead of their sons.
"If there are not enough blacks in place of my sons, go to the Springfield plantation and get as many more. If the Negroes should get killed, they are paid for. But if my children should go and get killed, they cannot be replaced." Plantation owner Calvin Smith.
Jackson then promised the slaves their freedom.
"If you will go and the battle is fought and the victory gained on Israel's side, you shall be free.
James Roberts, the Revolutionary War veteran who had been sold back into slavery, heard Jackson's speech. Years later, he recalled the events of that day in one of the first slave narratives.
Hardships of whatever kind or however severe vanished into vapor at the sound of freedom. James Roberts.
The slaves joined some 4,000 other American soldiers, including the 1st and 2nd Battalions of free men of color. The men, outnumbered 2 to 1, faced off against 8,000 battle-tested British troops. The fight was brief but deadly.
We felled them like grass before the scythe. Platoon after platoon lay like scattered hail upon the ground. James Roberts.
Six days earlier, rebel forces had also been defeated at Gettysburg, and the high tide of the Confederacy began to recede. In South Carolina, the rebel fortification Battery Wagner was Charleston Harbor's first line of defense. The Union Army considered its capture to be essential, and the all-black Massachusetts 54th led the attack to bring it down.
My dear wife, we are on the march to Fort Wagner to storm it. We have just completed a successful retreat from James Island. We fought a desperate battle there Thursday morning. God has protected me through this, my first fiery, leaded trial, and I do give him the glory. First Sergeant Robert Simmons, Massachusetts 54th.
Fort Wagner was located on a barrier island. The earthen installation was defended by 1,700 Confederate troops. When the attack came, some 600 men of the Massachusetts 54th marched across an open beach. The Union soldiers were cut down by a devastating torrent of gunfire. Sergeant Major Lewis Douglas, son of Frederick Douglass, wrote of the slaughter in a letter to his fiancée.
It was terrible. A shell would explode and clear a space of 20 feet. Our men would close up again, but it was no use. How I got out of that fight alive, I cannot tell. But I am here. Remember, if I die in a good cause. Sergeant Major Lewis Douglas.
272 members of the 54th were either killed or wounded in the attack. The unit's commanding officer, 25-year-old Colonel Robert Shaw, was one of those who lost his life.
We were exposed to a murderous fire from the battery of the fort. Mortal men could not stand such a fire. When the men saw their gallant leader fall, they made a desperate effort to get him out. But they were shot down or reeled in the ditch below. Corporal James Gooding.
When the color bearer was wounded, Private William Carney raced forward to rescue the American flag. As the former slave fought his way back to the Union lines, he was shot in the head, chest, right arm, and both legs. Despite his wounds, the 23-year-old soldier staggered into camp, clutching the bloody flag. His surviving comrades broke into cheers as William Carney proudly exclaimed,
"Boys, I did my duty. The dear old flag never touched the ground." Private William Carney.
For his actions that day, William Carney was awarded the Medal of Honor.
I decided I could best serve my God by serving my country and my oppressed brothers. Private William Carney.
Two years later, the USS Maine blew up in Havana Harbor. 266 sailors and Marines, including 22 Negroes, were killed. Enraged Americans, both black and white, blamed the Spanish and cried out, Remember the Maine.
There is no people on earth more loyal and devoted to their country than the Negro. I believe in the doctrine of peace taught by the lowly Nazarene, but one must have liberty before abiding peace can come. Force saved the Union, kept the stars in the flag, and made Negroes free. The time for God's force has come to free Cuba and avenge the Maine. Buffalo Soldier Horace W. Bivens.
On May 1st, 1898, fighting broke out in the Philippines. Minor skirmishes were fought in Puerto Rico, but the brunt of the war would play itself out in Cuba.
The colored men of America have immense interest at stake. As a citizen and patriot, let him make common cause with the people and again prove himself an element of strength and power in vindicating the honor and claims of his country in the hour of the nation's peril. If die we must, let us die defending a just cause. Cleveland Gazette.
Ultimately, it was Colonel Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders that captured the public's imagination. However, much of their glory, as well as their lives, were owed to the Buffalo Soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry.
If it had not been for the Negro Cavalry, the Rough Riders would have been exterminated. I am not a Negro lover. My father fought with Mosby's Rangers, and I was born in the South. But the Negroes saved that fight. Washington Post.
The charge up San Juan Ridge made the Buffalo Soldiers national heroes.
All honor to the black troopers of the gallant 10th. No more striking example of bravery and coolness has been shown since the destruction of the Maine than by the colored veterans of the 10th Cavalry during the attack upon San Juan. Firing as they marched, their aim was splendid, their coolness was superb, and their courage aroused the admiration of their comrades. Their advance was greeted with wild cheers from the white regiments, and with answering shouts, they pressed onward over the trenches they had taken close in pursuit of the retreating enemy. The war has not shown greater heroism. The men whose own freedom was baptized in blood have proved themselves capable of giving up their lives that others may be free. New York Mail and Express.
On the night of May 14th, 1918, Privates Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts were standing watch when a grenade landed in their trench. Private Needham was badly wounded and Henry Johnson was left to face a German patrol on his own. One of the unit's white officers, Major Arthur Little, would later tell his story.
The little soldier from Albany came down like a wildcat upon the shoulders of the German. As Johnson sprang, he unsheathed his bolo knife, and as his knife landed upon the shoulders of that ill-fated Boche, the blade of the knife was buried to the hilt through the crown of the German's head. Major Arthur Little, 369th Infantry Division.
In fierce hand-to-hand combat, the former red-cap porter of the New York Central Railroad single-handedly wounded or killed 24 enemy soldiers. Back in America, the story was front-page news. The press called the incident the Battle of Henry Johnson.
Having shot one of his foe down and clubbed another with the butt of his rifle, he sprang to the aid of Roberts with his bolo knife. As the enemy fell into disorderly retreat, Johnson, 3 times wounded, sank to the ground, seized a grenade alongside his prostrate body, and literally blew one of the fleeing Germans to fragments. Martin Green, The New York Evening World.
2 days later, the men were presented with the French Medal of Honor, the Croix de Guerre. They were the first American soldiers, black or white, to be so honored in World War I. When asked about the event, Henry Johnson said,
"There isn't so much to tell. Just fought for my life. A rabbit would have done that." Private Henry Johnson.
In August of 1944, the Buffalo Soldiers arrived in Italy. Ulysses Lee, the official government historian for the employment of Negro troops during World War II, was there.
As the thousands of black fighting men debarked from the crowded troop ships, they presented an impressive and awe-inspiring spectacle. Armed with basic weapons and full-field battle dress, proudly wearing the circular shoulder patch with the black buffalo, they moved smartly and efficiently into their unit formations. As they marched away, every man in step, every weapon in place, chins up and eyes forward, a low rumbling babble of sound came from the troops on the dock, then swelled to a crescendo of thunderous cheering, which continued until the last Buffalo unit had disappeared from sight. Ulysses Lee.
The unit's white commander, General Edward Almond, didn't want them in.
I did not send for you. Your Negro newspapers, Negro politicians, and white friends have insisted on your seeing combat. And I shall see to it that you get combat and your share of casualties. General Edmund Almond.
The 92nd Infantry battled some of Germany's best trained troops as they fought their way through Italy. In letters home, soldiers like 2nd Lieutenant Spencer Moore would write of their combat experiences.
Dear Mom and Pop, we've been on the line for 82 days, and I don't know when we're gonna get relieved. The men are lousy, sick, frostbitten, shell-shocked, and scared. It's no joke to see men you've known, lived with, eaten with, and slept with blown up or shot down before your eyes. Well, Mom, Jerry's beginning a shell again, so I'll sign off for now. Your loving son, Spencer.
The day after Christmas, 2 platoons of Buffalo Soldiers awoke to the sound of mortar fire. The area was swarming with Nazi troops, and within a few hours, the men were fighting for their lives. Nearby, Lieutenant John Fox was calling in artillery coordinates so that others could escape. As the shells moved closer and closer to his position, the officer in charge, Major Otis Zachary, who was also one of his best friends, refused to fire. The Germans were closing in. Lieutenant Fox radioed back.
Fire it.
No one survived who saw what happened next. But after the battle, a local priest reported seeing the body of John Fox surrounded by more than 100 dead enemy soldiers. Of the 95 American and Italian defenders, 18 made it back alive.
It was rough, but we were dedicated. We were fighting for a greater cause, for our people. We had to defeat them, and we had to prove that blacks would fight. If we failed, the whole black race would fail. We were fighting for the flag and for our rights. Sergeant James Tillman.
It was at the Battle of Chippo-Ri that Sergeant Cornelius Charlton became the Korean War's second Black Medal of Honor recipient. Weeks earlier, he had asked to be relieved of his administrative duties so that he could go to the front and fight. He told his commanding officer,
I just don't feel right sitting here while others are doing the fighting up north. Sergeant Cornelius Charlton.
He got his wish on June the 2nd, 1951, when he was ordered to attack a heavily defended hostile fortification. When the unit's platoon leader was badly wounded, Sergeant Charlton took charge, rallied the troops, and initiated 3 separate attacks. After suffering a serious chest wound, he refused medical attention. Holding his injuries with one hand and his rifle in the other, Cornelius Charlton charged into the firefight, bleeding from more than a dozen wounds. Blasting away, he continued his direct frontal assault until an enemy grenade brought him down. He died quietly next to the bunker he had just destroyed. At his funeral in West Virginia, the soldier's father was heard to say,
"The death of my boy distinctly makes a liar out of those who have said the Negro will not fight for our country. Those who have felt that the Negro is a second-class citizen must know in their hearts that this isn't so." Mr. Van Charlton.
Medical duty in Vietnam was dangerous work, and in many of the frontline military hospitals, African-American nurses ministered to wounded soldiers.
I had to go to Vietnam. I needed to go. Captain Elizabeth Allen.
Captain Allen was assigned to the 71st Evacuation Hospital, which was bombed during the Tet Offensive.
Men's lives were dependent on me, and my being scared was just not useful. You had these guys with massive wounds, not just a leg cut off, but as bad as 2 legs off, 2 arms off, and blind. I had to protect him. I had to make sure if a mortar hit, the shrapnel didn't hit him again. I had to keep them alive to the best of my ability. I sat on a razor's edge. Captain Elizabeth Allen.
Back in the States, African-American servicemen and women had begun to receive the kind of press attention that in wars past had been unthinkable. Sergeant Clyde Brown Jr. was even featured on the cover of Time. The magazine heralded his cool professionalism and the actions of others like him.
For the first time in the nation's military history, its Negro fighting men are fully integrated in combat. Their performance in battle proclaims a truth that Americans have not yet learned about themselves. Merit is the only measure of a man. Time Magazine.
Despite countless acts of heroism during World War II, no black servicemen had yet to receive the Medal of Honor. That terrible injustice was finally rectified when 7 African Americans were recognized for their valor.
These heroes distinguished themselves in another, almost unique way. In the tradition of African Americans who have fought for our nation as far back as Bunker Hill, they were prepared to sacrifice everything for freedom, even though freedom's fullness was denied to them. President Bill Clinton.
The honorees included Private George Watson, who gave his life rescuing soldiers aboard the Dutch steamer Jacob when it was attacked by Japanese bombers. First Lieutenant John Fox was killed the day after Christmas, stopping a Nazi advance in Italy. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers was recognized for leading the way in France. Major Charles Thomas stormed a village 5 miles from the German border. He later remarked, "I was sent to draw enemy fire, but I didn't mean to draw that much." Staff Sergeant Edward Carter, despite being shot 5 times, managed to kill 6 of his attackers and capture the other 2 before returning to his unit. Private First Class Willie James lost his life trying to save his wounded platoon leader. Second Lieutenant Vernon J. Baker destroyed multiple German positions, then covered the evacuation of his company's wounded by drawing the enemy's bullets. He was the only man who lived long enough to attend the ceremony.
As a black soldier,
I fought a war on two sides. I was an angry young man, and all my soldiers were angry. But we had a job to do, and we did it. Medal of Honor recipient, Vernon Baker.
God bless America.
American servicemen and women were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan when back home, the American people elected their 44th president. On a cold winter morning, with 1.8 million people in attendance, Barack Obama placed his hand on Abraham Lincoln's Bible and repeated the oath of office.
So help me God.
With those words, the United States of America had its first black commander-in-chief.
The time has come to reaffirm our enduring spirit, to choose our better history, to carry forward that precious gift, that noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
The story of America's black patriots is a paradox. Since 1641, there has never been a time in our history when African Americans were unwilling to serve and bravely sacrifice for their country. Yet, despite this valiant heritage, until recently, no matter the conflict, whenever America was engaged in war, the question, would the Negro fight, was raised in numerous ways, and always with the same racist assumptions. African Americans were inferior. They couldn't be trusted with a gun. They didn't have the intelligence or the courage to fight. They wouldn't follow orders, let alone ever be capable of giving them.
As history has vividly demonstrated, what ultimately needed to be asked wasn't would the Negro fight, but rather why. As African American servicemen and women continue to shed their blood in the defense of the United States, the answer to that question is abundantly clear. Like all Americans in all wars, African Americans fought for love of liberty.
Thank you, Frank Martin. General Bray, can you put in context who Frank Martin is and the impact of the story that he's told?
Frank's story is absolutely fantastic because he had the opportunity to collect a lot of information very similar to what Mr. Powell has done, except he was in the visual arts. And so he took paintings, he took combat camera footage from wars, and what you all saw was a compilation of 10,000 hours culled down to 6 hours of classroom instruction, and then in this case, a 30-minute synopsis of what he has just, of his work. What he did was this. He took it from the first round being fired to establish us as a nation, being taken by Crispus Attucks and dying for this nation. Not a mistake. He actually said, I will not be a slave to another nation or another man again. and then it's validated by John Adams, who said in the time. And then it culminates. You know, as you saw, it culminates with Barack Obama standing on the steps of the Capitol, becoming our commander-in-chief. So all the pieces are there. And with our Secretary of State this year being General Austin, the puzzle has been completed. We've now occupied every space, every entity of command in this nation. And all did it for the same reason, for the love of liberty.
What we want to understand is we've seen the movie, For the Love of Liberty. We've talked to Jerry Hodges and understood a little bit about the lieutenant's time in the service and what that was about. I'd like to know, first off, your impressions of that part of our day. So over to you, General.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, it was, there are some subtleties in Mr. Hodges' conversation that were missed. One is that by the time he finished training, by the way, Moton Field is a airfield between Tuskegee University, a college at the time, and Montgomery, Alabama. It was an isolated location, and that's where he was trained. The first group that was put there and they did the training, they were trained by white pilots, and then there was one black pilot that came from Canada to assist. And then the second generation, which is what he's part of, in his year of training, he had black pilots. So now all of a sudden he has both the benefit of inspiration and aspiration right in front of him. And this is powerful because as we start to move forward, this becomes important. That's when you have to get the kind of density to go forward. The other thing he said that was important was he said he wasn't thinking about his place in history. He was thinking about being the best pilot he could be in preparation to go to combat. That's consistent with the thought that sometimes we forget, and we forget to impart on the kids today. This is kind of, and I shouldn't say kids because it's not true, to the youth of today and to America writ large. You know, there's a big upheaval we had for a while, and his grandfather talked about it, which was the flag. Whose flag is this? I don't support the flag. I don't do this. The flag is truly in itself irrelevant till you understand it. The flag of our states on that blue field that stands for valor, and those 50 stars that stand for people who went blood in, blood out. Those are states. They were not going to separate, and they were not going to represent the homogeny of Europe, where language, religion, and all those things belong to the state. We became different. And then the 13 stripes that exist on that flag were for the 13 colonies that says they would not abide by the rules of a monarchy, where somebody could say, I am better than you by God. And then the collective of that is the Constitution. That document that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. calls perfectly the world's great experiment. And then when you look at those 13 stripes, they start with the red, end with the red. The red stands for the blood and valor, the blood and commitment of the nation. And remember, the first person to die for that commitment to a nation where all men could be created equal was Crispus Attucks, and that's not revisionist history. That is written and documented by Adams. So that Constitution, that flag, represents black folks. When you decide to say, it's not mine, you dishonor an African American, the first person to die for us. And that's what his grandfather was telling him. He said, I don't care why I'm here. This is mine. I built it, I committed to it, and our commitment to make it greater. That's what every time that uniform comes on, you know that's a symbol of ownership.
It is a reality of who we are as Americans. You know, the 4th of July is something that Americans celebrate every year. But what I look at, when I see the parade going by, I see men and women of what? Of America. They represent the four corners of our planet. Why? Because liberty and justice for all. That is the key to what America is. The past few years we've been worried about, let's make America great again. But what makes America great? America is great because of who she is, and from those four corners of our planet, they come for liberty and justice for all. That is the key to America. That is America's greatness. And my grandfather and all of those men over the years that I talked to and talked about, well, why did you join this army? What made you enlist? And it all comes back to the same thing: liberty and justice for all. These men didn't think in their lifetime that they may see the things that you and I see today, but they knew it was going to happen. And it did happen. So we have generations now that need to be aware of, in the stream of time and history, who we are. We are all Americans. We are one of the only nations on the planet that offers liberty and justice for all. And that is what makes America great.
General Bray, having reached the status that you reached in the Army, now being in the, I'm sure that you've researched the history of black soldiers over and over and over again. What can you tell us? Here it is, Veterans Day. We've been in the presence of historian Anthony Powell. He's told us a little bit. We've heard from Lieutenant Jerry Hodges. We've looked at the documentary Love of Liberty. What can you say to us?
I'd say a couple things. One is first of all, I think it's important to understand that America and its military, and African Americans and their military, are intertwined with each other. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Birmingham papers, they used to always tell that story and gave you a chance to let you know that you're intertwined. And we've tried to separate ourselves for a little while. But one of the key impacts of our military that I like to bring up is, especially right now, this time, this period, is we lost Colin Powell most recently. And this Veterans Day, we ought to think about his impact on America, because if we don't have him, we don't get Barack Obama, certainly not during the time period that we got him. Because he showed America both the intellect, the courage, the strategist, the statesmanship that made us believe that we could be that person that Americans can see. And people, and anyone ever says, well, the African Americans made him president. Really? 13% gave him a majority vote. No, that was America at its finest, recognizing that what you're looking at was a person that had those skills, knowledge, and abilities that were gleaned from the military. And so, and he also carries the American story so perfectly as a son of an immigrant, recognizing that piece. So I would say that's the first part I would tell you. The second part I would tell you is that the African American getting his freedoms through the military and what they did in expanding the United States westward, leading that effort without the fanfare that television, movies capture in its imitation of life, but not fully. Because the West became the new North without all the baggage of the history of leveraging the African American as a slave. And so we carry that. That's one of the reasons why people like you as an actor, your brain isn't full of all of the other anchors of life. It's the truth. And that's because the westward movement, you know, I like to sometimes say the African American soldier carried the movement west, and that's why I think there's a movement that needs to take place, and there needs to be an African American museum either here in LA or in Vegas, because it gives them something else to do and something else to know and see and tell our story in an environment. And Mr. Powell, what he has done, it is both factual, it's illuminated, it is echoed, it is repeated in the stories of all the people inside of these living documents, the uniforms, the saddles that he has carried around in 2 connexes full of people and the ghost that they bring to us.
In the last minutes remaining to us, I'd like to go back to historian Anthony Powell. I think we're down to seconds, correct? And I'd like you to just start naming names that we are to remember of these giants of our past, these warriors. Just names.
Just names. Vance Hunter Marchbanks, 10th Cavalry. Edward L. Baker, won the Congressional Medal of Honor during the Spanish-American War. Walter Howard Loving wrote the national anthem. He was the founder of the Philippine Constabulary Band. He was the first African American to lead an inaugural parade of a president in 1909. My grandfather, Samuel Nathaniel Waller, because it was because of him that I met a lot of old soldiers here in Los Angeles. These soldiers, men and women, are inspiring.
It's been my pleasure, and on Veterans Day 2021, I appreciate you gentlemen.
Appreciate you,
Thank
Sam.
you. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thank you.